After clearing up after that wonderful dance with that gang that was trying to take advantage of the situation, I was finally able to get myself cleaned up and was able to get online since we still had electricity, which was difficult now that I had to relearn how to type. All that was being shown on the reports after report after video, whether it be the news or influencers or whatever, was creatures running around doing bad things. They were scurrying around trying desperately to get food, which meant most were at the grocery stores clearing the shelves of anything edible. CCTV cameras caught the melee in size as they fought for food and quickly came down on anyone who tried to force them out. Couldn't say that I blamed them for what they were doing. I had cleared out 2 weeks of food in one sitting, though the more I look at the videos, I notice something. Not all of them seem to have cognitive abilities anymore. At least, not to the degree you would think a human would. Several stalked their prey and attacked anything that they could reach. Others, creatures, pets, strays, humans. It didn't matter, they all craved sustenance. I watched a video of a few dogs getting ripped apart, a few humans getting attacked, creatures getting shot down as they searched for food, even one poor bastard that seemed to be part fish thrashing on the ground as he desperately tried to reach a stream in the distance. He didn't have to die of suffocation, though. A group of creatures swarmed him and ripped him apart in a matter of seconds. Reports of military units trying desperately to get themselves organized came across. This made me glad I wasn't in anymore. With my luck, I would have stood at a gate with my ID in my hand and still caught a full magazine. Not that I would be stupid enough to try that after all. I did find myself hoping and worrying that they would be able to get themselves together. I'm sure the police were far too overwhelmed by the situation. This was proven as I heard that multiple states had activated their militia units and freely engaged any creature they see. Oh, we are in deep for sure now. I looked out my window and could see people desperately trying to get into their vehicles. Found myself praying that they could get out before things got any worse, though I didn't even have time to get halfway through that thought as I could see creatures trying to get in position to ambush a family. I know it was a risk, but I can't watch a family with small children get taken down and torn apart. Taking a deep breath, I bolted for the back door, hoping that I wouldn't be seen exiting. I once again moved as fast as these new limbs could carry me. Keeping to the shrubbery, I ended up climbing to the rooftops. Peeking over, I could see a group was getting primed for their pounce. The family, or now families, were completely oblivious as they hastily continued to pack their vehicles. I didn't have time to worry about who to get first, only that I could reach the closest one if I moved now. With a burst of speed, I got a running start on all fours and used these new legs to launch me to the next building where the closest creature was ready. Just as he was beginning to make his run, I landed on its back legs. With a howl from the creature, I could feel that I landed with enough force to break at least one of its legs. I could see that the entire human group had turned their heads to look at me. Must have been a hell of a sight, considering my new size. The creature I landed on seemed to be almost avian in nature. The talons on its hands and feet made that clear. Being on its back, I grabbed its head with one hand and one on the shoulder. I spread them apart as I got ready to use these powerful jaws to remove this thing's throat. Just then, something big and powerful slammed into me. This had enough force to send me flying clear off the roof, landing with a bit of a thud as I rolled and got back onto all fours. I looked up at the much larger creature stood over the one I had just crippled when I landed. This one was similar to me, as in reptilian, but it was far more brawn than I am. It looked at me and snarled. Then it looked at the alien creature and picked it up. I figured it was going to bring it back to let it heal. Instead, it ripped the creature open and began to consume it. Other creatures immediately scurried over and joined in as they began to eat every last part of this bird-like creature. I didn't sit and watch, but instead I retreated into the underbrush nearby. I made it back to where the humans were finishing up their packing. However, now they had posted a couple of men with weapons. I could see them get into their vehicles and begin to drive out. Being gated complex, I just hoped that they could get past the gate so they could reach the highway. In total, 3 vehicles were on the move, and I grinned as they lined up for the speed bumps and the last turn to the gate. This is when I saw movement from the pond. It was a small fishing pond that they had put in for some recreation. Now it housed something much worse. By the time I realized there was something in the water, it had jumped out and had charged the trail vehicle. I thought to myself, hit the gas, asshole, as I looked at the SUV, but I guess he didn't see it coming. The alligator-like creature from the other night slammed into the SUV with such force it actually flipped it onto its side. When I heard the screaming of the children inside, my body moved without thinking. The gator, which remained on all fours, began to circle the vehicle looking for a way to get the meal inside. I could see it salivate as it lined up and charged. I was running at full speed now as I heard glass break and women screaming. He began to pull a woman out by her legs and then bit down hard enough to take it clean off. The woman screamed her final scream as blood gushed out from her amputation. The gator was busy trying to swallow his prize, shoe and all, when I reached it. I came at it with my claws and teeth, really wishing I had grabbed a knife. I ended up on its back. I tried to sink my claws in for a better grip, but didn't get far at all. Neither did my teeth. I quickly realized that the hide was just too thick for me to penetrate alone. It thrashed just like a normal gator would, but with more dexterity in its extended arms and legs. This must be how it got so fast. I was trying like hell to make sure I didn't lose my grip. It was definitely not my intention to lose a limb today. After a few seconds, I could see something coming in my peripheral vision. I turned, and one of the men had gotten out of their car with a pistol. I looked at him as he raised the weapon and shifted all my weight and exposed the gator's underbelly. With this, I heard him empty the magazine into its exposed underbelly. They had to penetrate, since I could hear the gator let out a sickening sound. It tried to roll back over, but I had gotten it pinned into position, just praying that this guy's aim was good. As the final shot exited, the gator went limp. I pushed it off of me and tried to get on my feet. The unmistakable sound of a fresh magazine being inserted made me turn and look at the man. As he raised the weapon, I knew I didn't have any place to hide, nor was I bulletproof. So I simply raised my hands and lowered my head. He paused for only a moment before I could hear a female voice telling him to stop. I looked up a little as the female told him how I had saved her the night before. He didn't believe her until she mentioned that I was the one that gave her the pistol he was holding. He looked confused before I told him the model and serial number. When he read them, he lowered his weapon, and the adults ran to the turned-over vehicle to check on the survivors. Only a baby was still in his car seat, and a little boy, along with the driver, were pulled out. The rest just didn't make it. I didn't have time to think about it, though. I knew the noise had to have attracted the other creatures in the area, and I was right. Small ones that used to be cats, dogs, and even rats came scurrying forward. I still needed to give the humans time, so I decided to play whack-a-mole, or in this case, whack-a-creature. If they were lucky, they would get a mouthful of food before I eviscerated them. Once the humans got their people and supplies, they took off without even saying goodbye. Nice folks. So much for civility. Though, at this point, I really didn't care. My prize was shot full of holes on the street. Picking it up, it seemed to be a lot heavier than it looked. I grinned, thinking this must mean it has a lot of meat on it then. I was so hungry. So ravenously hungry that I wasn't going to leave hundreds of pounds of food behind. I tried my best to be sneaky as I got back to my apartment. Once inside, I dropped the carcass onto the dining room floor and got a really good look at it. This thing had definitely been human at one point. There were still pieces of clothes on it, mainly on its arms and legs. The arms and legs were much longer than a normal alligator and far more muscular. The head was much rounder than a gator would be too. The eyes were almost seemingly human. As I expected, the hide I found that was similar to alligator hide, but with one major difference. Near the base of it was a much harder, making it nearly plate armor. I tried driving a knife through it and just ended up breaking the damn knife. By this point, I had had enough of this and turned the oven on. Though my brother knows how to butcher things, I only happen to know the basics. Since the ventral side was much weaker, it was easier to gut the damn thing. I was so hungry at that point that the intestines, organs, and most of the blood went down my throat within the hour. Suddenly, grateful that my new body could suck down most of it without chewing, I satiated my hunger, especially with the liver, as I moved on. The limbs were far more muscular than I had anticipated, and I decided that I would just roast them as they are. Slow cooking them would make it far tastier. The ribs were separated and placed on the side since I didn't have any place to put them yet, and eventually they would be hanging off my shower curtain rod. The tail was the best part of all. At about 7 feet long, it was packed full of meat. It took me at least 2 hours to get it all processed out. Eventually, the only things that were left were the head, the claws, and the hide itself, though the hide wouldn't last long either. I found that once it was off the body, I could rip it apart and each, like a potato chip, satisfied me very well and was surprisingly tasty. It would take more than a day to cook the limbs, dry the tail into jerky, and dispose of the remains I wasn't going to eat. I was about to throw out the head when I looked at the eyes. I remembered one of my old NCOs talking about how in SEER school, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, they had to suck the eyes out of a rabbit and eat it. Might as well not let too much go to waste. I carved out the eyes and had them as a first snack and remembered to cut out the jaw meat and ate that too. Surprisingly, it was quite tasty. I stayed inside for a few days after that. I looked outside on occasion to see if anything else was going on. At least around here, things had gotten quiet. I spent a lot of time online looking at the chaos around the world. It turns out that a good portion of the creatures had simply died from the transformation. Others were going around eating what or who they could find. Video of cities showed creatures being shot while they ate, and others would show up and get shot too. Areas of the world that didn't have firearms did fare far worse than others. Those rich oil cities in the Middle East were now ghost towns. The East Indies had major population centers gutted, figuratively and literally. With most of their populations compacted into their cities, they made for much easier targets. China, well, let's just say they didn't fare any better, though in some areas far worse. The little bit coming out showed the streets covered in blood. Not even kidding. Russia seemed to fare much better, but there is a reason, fight like Russians is such a common phrase around the world. Europe is in total disarray as each country is not only fighting creatures, but also their social upheavals that seem to kick off in a big way. Though it was kind of funny to me to see a group of migrants begin to riot and pillage only to get ripped apart by creatures hell-bent on getting their fill of flesh for the day. Not much came out of Africa, information-wise, but what did really didn't look good. South Africa itself went dark after a few hours after the rest of Africa did. You didn't get much except a little bit out of Albania and then Egypt. Topography might help them a little down there, but I couldn't tell. Australia and the Philippines were doing okay, a lot better than you'd think, but information was slowly coming down considering it by this point. It looks like this was the way a worldwide phenomenon after all. I could still hear the occasional shot being fired throughout the night. Sometimes it would be several in rapid succession, meaning that a group of the creatures tried to break into someone's place. I was fine in my place for a few days, but I had to get out. This new body gets restless, and I have to get up and move, or I get really bad cramps in my arms and legs. Moving around at night was not an issue at all. With my new night vision, I only had to watch out for sudden bursts of light. I had eye surgery a few years ago, and sudden changes of light hurt a lot, at least used to. There were much fewer buildings with their lights on than I had seen on previous nights. I guess the situation is was to be expected. I could see creatures moving about as they hunted for their next meal. So glad I had an extra in my place. They seemed to be circling a few remaining buildings with the lights on. I tried and looked into the windows, but they had been smart enough to cover the windows. Sure hoped they had set up some traps or something, or else they're pretty much screwed. As I moved around, I found a good spot in which to view the area. It was up a tree, overwatched the community. I was having some trouble sitting still as I watched the movements. Every once in a while, I could see a couple of creatures get too close to each other. This brought a fight, which would bring even more looking for an easy meal. This would, in turn, cause a brawl, which would bring even more, so on and so forth. It was strange to watch as they would go after one another, attempt to rip off a piece. Some of the unlucky ones would lose a piece of themselves and keep fighting just to lose another piece from a different opponent. It was almost like watching piranhas feeding, but also feeding on each other. One of the largest ones tried to break into an occupied building and found themselves at the wrong end of a shotgun. This dog-like humanoid crumpled to the ground, missing its head. Then others came and started ripping it and the carcass apart, not realizing that the one inside had planned for this. I saw a small light be thrown out from the upstairs window to the group, and in a flash the entire area was engulfed in flames. It was smart to use an area weapon to take out as many as possible, but it wasn't smart to use a Molotov cocktail. The flames quickly spread as many of the smaller creatures tried to step into the flames to get a bite of food. This would lead to them catching fire as well. One was smart enough to instantly run to the pond. I chuckled once I knew there wasn't anything in there anymore. With a flash of water, something did jump out. It was a head. A giant turtle head. It grabbed the small creature and dragged it under before it had come up for a chance to scream. "Holy shit!" I said quietly as I watched the carnage. When I looked back at the fire, it had nearly burned itself out. Looking closer, I had to guess that they had used kerosene and not gasoline, since it burned away so fast. I could still see bursts from a fire extinguisher coming out the windows as the last of it was put out. I figured that was the most I would watch that night. I slowly climbed down the tree, making sure not to move the limbs too much, and made my way back. After a quick snap, I was ready to sleep. I woke up about 2 hours later in severe pain. My arms and legs felt like they were ripping themselves apart, which, with that much pain, I expected nausea, but it never came. Also, my lower back was in severe pain as well. So much so that I could barely control my legs, though all this did not compare to the insane amount of hunger I had. Crawling to the kitchen, I proceeded to eat all my remaining rations, this including the remaining hide that ended up going down from the one who was shot. Though I was going to choke for a second, but a few drinks of water, I was good. After finishing off the kitchen supplies, I staggered my way to the bathroom and proceeded to eat the ribs as well, bones and all. I didn't care. After which, I just about fell down the stairs to get the water. Everything out of my gravity feed filter went into me, and then so did the last of my sports drinks. With the pain finally subsided, I tried to climb back into bed, but I didn't make it. Sleep had me in its grasp, and it was not going to let go. I was able to crawl behind the couch so anyone looking in couldn't see me. The pain in my appendages and my back was enough to get me there, but not enough to keep me conscious. I woke up the next morning so thirsty I almost couldn't stand it. With nothing left in my filter, I went to the sink and just opened my mouth and let the water in. Unfortunately for me, only a little bit came out. So, plan B. I went to the bathroom and opened the back. Call it gross if you want, but at least it wasn't out of the bowl. I need more than what was in there, so I flushed, hoping that it would refill. Again, it filled extremely slow. Thankfully, I had another toilet and could open the back on that. This time, I got enough in me. If you think this was too far, talk to me when you've been 3 days without water and this is your only source. I lifted my head, realizing I would need a new source of water, and soon. Walking out of the bathroom, I saw myself in the mirror. Without regard to noise discipline, I screamed, "Holy